So hopefully, as I was saying, you remember that the Vedas are four: Rik, Yajur, Sama. Rik, Yajur, Sama are the main three. Atharva, in one text it says, because Atharva Veda deals with protecting from enemies, it's kind of put in a different category. It's like magic spells and incantations. A lot of the Upanishads, when they refer to the Vedas, they just talk about Rig, Yajur, and Sama. Sama is the source of music. It's the source of the 7-tone Indian scale, raga scale. And it's basically takes a 1,000 or so of the hymns of the Rig Veda and tells you how to sing them. But when the Rig Veda mantras are chanted, they're chanted in a 3-tone scale. When the Sama Veda mantras are chanted, it's with the 7-tone scale. But we're mostly talking about the Rig Veda. That's what we've been talking about, the Rig Veda Samhita, the kind of core. And each of the Vedas has 4 parts, right? The Samhita, the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and the 4th part, of which all the Vedas have, this 4th part, is Upanishads. And, there's one of the Upanishads is called the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So you can see how things already are tangled. We have an Upanishad that's called an Aranyaka, the great Aranyaka. And Aranyaka means forest dissertation, and chronologically, historically, there's a lot of theories about this, but I'm going to tell you mine. I'm not just kind of making up. It's based on research and understanding. And the Rig Veda was received by the rishis, the seers, the ones who kind of downloaded it, received it. And then the Brahmanas represent kind of an accretion of laws, order. This is how things are done. This is the way society should be structured. This is, and there needs to be priests, and you can't really know any of this on your own. It needs to be translated by us. We're the only ones that's kind of inner, outer, the mediators between the human and the divine. The Brahmanas, this is where the Brahmin caste, comes in, and the Brahmin caste says, remember Agni mi'ile purohitam, Agni, the priest, purohitam yagyasya, the priest of the sacrifice. The Agni is the priest of the sacrifice. So the Brahmins kind of say, yeah, we're going to take that role. We're going to be the purohit. And all this kind of codification is happening. And that happens for a period of time. And then there is, of course, a rebellion. As we see in Western history, the history of Western religion as well. There's a rebellion against the codification, against the structures, against the kind of watering down and rigidifying of spirituality. And the beginning, that rejection or that revolt or rebellion is captured in the Yoga Sutras. It's captured in Buddhism. But the beginning of it, where it starts, is the Upanishads, especially the early Upanishads, which are pre-Buddhism. The Upanishads, some of them are like 500 BCE or before, depending on, your chronology of things. Some of them are much later. There's, Upanishads that are written well into the 2nd millennium after... I don't know how we're supposed to talk about time these days, but the 1500s, 1600s, and even later. So, but what we're going to talk about today is really the primary, the kind of original, the oldest Upanishads, of which there are 11 Mukhya Upanishads. And like I said, they're a rebellion. They're like, no, you can't tell me about that you have the secret that I can never have, and I just have to be in a kind of subordinate position and pay you and do all these rituals so that, it's in a way, the spirituality of the Vedas became extractive and transactional. It became about what can I get? What can my family get? And maintaining order, which of course is important, maintaining order in a community. There has to be rules and agreements about what is okay and what's not. But it's when it kind of gets overly heavy on that. And then the Upanishads are a response. And there's a group of people who are known as the Shramanas. Shramanas basically means the strivers, the ones that are working at it, the ones that are trying, efforting. And the Buddha was a Shramana. And the Yoga Sutras are essentially a collection of findings. The Shramanas built ashrams. The ashrams were places of collective work, collective what comes to be collective yoga, and some of them are fairly formal. There's a guru and there's disciples, and these lineages of yoga grow out of this time. So Rigveda Samhita, Brahmanas, rigidification, Upanishads are the early reflections of these Shramanas, or what, maybe they weren't called Shramanas at that time and they become called Shramanas later, but this is the seed out of which the Shramana movement grows. And there are many commentaries on the Upanishads. So you have the Upanishads themselves, the text, the actual words, and then you've got commentaries. And one of the most famous commentariers on the Upanishads is Shankara. And Shankara was, he was a South Indian in the 8th century, I think. He only lived until his 30s, but he was an absolute genius of taking the wisdom of the Upanishads and compiling it and saying kind of, this is the implication of all this. And Vedanta, which you may have heard of, which essentially means the end of the culmination of the Vedas. The Vedanta movement was initiated and traces its roots to Shankara. So his commentaries have a very Vedantic flavor. And it's important, I find, to distinguish between commentary and text. It's a little bit challenging sometimes because the text can be, especially some of the metaphors and some of the language is a little bit obtuse. So the commentaries can kind of help us connect. But the other thing that I've found helps connect the Upanishads and provide some understanding is reading them all together and reading different translations. And obviously, like when you can read it in Sanskrit, it's a lot more of a touch. But comparing them to each other, because there's a lot of overlap. And the Upanishads, they follow two different tracks. And of course, as with everything, this is not linear. It's not 1 and 2. It's 1, 2, and then they're all intertwined. But if I'm going to divide them up into 2 tracks, the one track is cosmology. This is what happened when there was 1, and then the 1 became 2, and the 2 became 3, and then the 3 became a billion. This is the course of creation. So that's done in a straightforward way, and it's done in metaphor, and there's some Upanishads that are just teachings. Isha Vasayamidam, the Isha Upanishad, Isha Vasayamidam, everything, all of this was made to be worn by the divine like clothes, was made to be inhabited by the Lord. Isha is essentially like the Lord. Isha Vasayam Idam Sarvam Kinchit Jagatyam Jagat. So like all this whirling, all this spinning universes, the universes within universes, the galaxies within galaxies, all of this was made to be worn by the divine, by the Lord. So that's the beginning of the Isha Upanishad, which is one of the maybe kind of sometimes considered the principle, that the one central Upanishad. But I think that's probably not even worth saying because they're all so amazing and so powerful. But that's a statement about the universe, about the cosmos. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad talks about this whole universe is the sacrificial horse. And the horse sacrifice is, that's a big tangent. I think I'm not going to go down it, but let's just say that's how the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad starts. The Kena Upanishad. Kena means who. which, like who is it that makes my mind think, that makes my eyes see, that makes my ears hear? Who is it? That's how the Kena Upanishad. So these are kind of like foundational and just directed as a teaching. And then the other Upanishads, and again, some of these Upanishads have both parts in them, it's a dialogue. The Katha Upanishad, Nachiketas, it's a young man, goes and sits outside of death's door for 3 days, and death's minions, Yama's minions, come to him and say, hey, there's this kid sitting outside the door for 3 days. That's really not right. You better offer him something just sitting out there. You're supposed to invite a guest in when they come to your house. And so death says, okay, come in. You're very patient. I'm impressed. Would you like 3 boons? I'll give you 3 boons. And the third boon that Nachiketas chooses is, tell me about death. What happens after we die? Some people say that after a person dies, they still exist. And some people say they don't still exist. Which is it? That's his question. And of course, death is like, I'm not going to answer that question. They go through the whole dance until death does answer the question. And that's the bulk of the Upanishad, is death's answer. So it's this, the death is the teacher, Nachiketas is the student. In the Chandogya Upanishad, there are several different encounters between teacher and student. Indra and Virachana, Indra the Deva of the Vedas, the kind of the Lord of Heaven, and then Asura, a being of division, go together to Prajapati, to Brahma, and ask him for a teaching. And so there's a whole part that of the eighth book, second half of the eighth book of the Chandogya Upanishad, is Prajapati teaching Indra and Virachana. I'm going to talk a lot more about that one. Yajnavalkya and his wife, Maitreyi. Yajnavalkya says, Maitreyi, my wife, I'm going out into the forest to become a hermit. And so I need to arrange so that you're taken care of. And she's like, what do I need your money for? Tell me the truth. Tell me about the divine. Tell me about the self. That's what I want to know. And so that's part of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, or Taittiriya Upanishad. That's part of the Taittiriya Upanishad, is this conversation between Yajnavalkya and his wife. Yajnavalkya and Janaka, King Janaka is another one. So it's all these conversations that are between a guru and a disciple. The whole Prajna Upanishad is 6 questions asked by 5 disciples who approach a teacher. And so it's this kind of back and forth between them. So that's so the one is like it's presenting something, the Isha Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, parts of Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya, they're presenting something. And the other approach to this is to describe a conversation between a teacher and a student. And you see this framework in the Bhagavad Gita later on with Krishna and Arjuna, the same teacher-student framework, where the student is asking questions and the teacher's answering. And you get to kind of see this dynamic. You get to see the teacher responding. And the teachers in these Upanishads, it's not always like, why is the sky blue? And a straight answer. Sometimes the answers are a bit sideways. And sometimes the teacher will say, will give an answer that's not the whole answer to allow the student to grow into that answer. The other kind of pattern with these teacher-student Upanishads is, for example, in the Prajna Upanishad, the 5 students approach the teacher and he says, yeah, slow down, sit here for a year with brahmacharya and shraddha and tapas, with intentionality, with containment, and with faithfulness. Stay with me for a year, then we can talk. Until then, nothing. In the Chandogya, this Upanishad where Prajapati is talking to Indra and the Asura, he says 32 years. Talk to me and stay here for 32 years, and then I'll tell you some things. But until then, so there's this kind of you got to earn it. You got to demonstrate the faithfulness and the intentionality. So the other thing that's interesting about the Upanishads and that touches on this kind of shift from Brahmanas to Upanishads is a lot of times, and this isn't universally true, but a lot of times the one who's doing the teaching is a kshatriya, not a Brahmin. And so you can see how it's like, it's the, and what's, for example, Shaunaka and Angiras in the Mundaka Upanishad. Shaunaka approaches Angiras and says, what's the one thing that if you know it, you know everything? And Angiras basically says there's the higher teaching and the lower teaching. And as a Brahmin, you know the higher teaching. I mean, you know the lower teaching. The lower teaching is all the rituals and all the things you're supposed to do and all the ways that you make the fire perfect and all that stuff. That's all the lower teaching. The higher teaching is about yourself, about the universe, about your deepest being and your deepest being's relationship to everything else in the universe. And this is the place, a lot of the Upanishads, that's where they're headed. They might give a million different metaphors and a million different descriptions of creation, and they're kind of working their way. They talk about all these different subjects, but the place that they're generally headed is yourself and Brahman. Brahman, which means the vastness. Brahman, which means the expansive, the one, the ever expanding reality. And Atman. Atman is the word that's often used for the self. Now, the words Atman and Brahman, it's Atman. Atman and Brahman, they're sometimes used interchangeably, sometimes other words are substituted, but essentially it's like the stuff that fills everything. And then this self inside your own, and one of the things is inside the depth of your own heart, the space inside your own heart. And one of the Upanishads, I can't remember which one right now, says there's a small space inside the heart of every human. This is from the Chandogya. There's a small space within the heart of every human. And everything in the universe is inside that space. Everything that's ever been created, everything in manifestation is inside this small space within the heart of every creature. It doesn't say human, it says within every creature, within every living thing. And of course, I say the word creature, living thing, human. These are all translations. And this is one thing that's important. It's, important throughout all the texts of yoga, and it's centrally important here with the Upanishads. You can get, what's the guy? Eknath Easwaran's Upanishads. And you can read that, he has a translation of the Upanishads. If you look at the actual Upanishads, if you can read Sanskrit, it's pretty far. He's taken some liberties. It's beautiful. He's capturing the essence. He really is capturing. And that's really the point. It's like these beautiful concepts that lead you into the depth of yourself. That's what's important. And he does capture that. But the actual translation, sometimes I'm just like, that is not even the word. You just made that whole thing up. He throws sentences in there. He's trying to clarify, and he's trying to make it digestible to a modern English-speaking person. And he does a great job of that. And then there are other translations that are much more, have much more fidelity to the words. And, sometimes they're hard to understand. And so that's the trade-off. But everything, a lot of what we consume in the West as Upanishads, everything is a translation. And somebody did that. One person did that. So they're giving you their translation. And what I'm giving you is my translation, right? So everything that I'm offering you is through my own lens. That's the only thing I can do. And so the only way to kind of get through that is to study Sanskrit and be able to read the Upanishads in the original. Yeah, well, we're going to do basic Sanskrit. I'm not going to get you far enough to be able to do much with the Upanishads.
No,
but
then Angela.
So that's kind of that's the lay of the land when it comes to the Upanishads. I ask myself often, especially in the relationship to this teacher training, why so many teacher trainings, they just talk about the Yoga Sutras. And there's some value in staying simple. You can go a lot deeper. You can spend more time with it. Why do I feel like this is important? Why is this necessary to go into these texts? And as I was preparing for this session, and especially really immersing myself in the Upanishads, I really felt this is what the world needs right now. This is what the earth needs right now, because everything is pointing me back to myself. Who are you? Okay, who are you on this layer? Who are you on this layer? The teaching that Prajapati gives to Indra and Virochana. Remember, Indra is the Deva, the radiant one. Virochana is the Asura, the child of division, the sometimes it's translated as Titan, the demon. Indra and Virochana, they go together to Prajapati and they say, teach us, we heard you give this teaching about how to gain mastery over all the worlds and have everything that we desire. We both want that, so how do we get it? And Prajapati says, wait here for 32 years and then I'll teach you. So they both do. They stay for 32 years. And after the 32 years, he says, okay, Brahman, the Purusha, the self, is what you see. When you look in a mirror, when you look at your reflection in the water, what you see, that's the self. And they're like, wow, I'm looking in the mirror, I see myself, down to my hair and my fingernails, I see myself. And then he says, get all dressed up fancy and then look again. And they get all dressed up fancy and he's like, what do you see? And they're like, I see myself all dressed up fancy. And he's like, yes, that is the self. And they're like, wow, amazing. So they leave. And Virochana goes and down to all his demon friends. And he's like, you guys never believe it. What you can see, the physical form of everything, that's the self. And so they elevate that, the physical form, the superficial, glamour, what it looks like. And Indra's like, yeah, wait, hold on a second. That doesn't really seem right. Because this body, this stuff that I see, it gets sick and it dies and it suffers. Like if I'm blind, then it's blind. And if my body dies, does the self die? If this thing that I see dies, it's like, I'm going back. He actually says, I don't see anything good here. I'm going back. So he goes back to Prajapati, who of course is like, thank God. Because as they left, he was like, these guys, where are they going? They don't know anything. So Indra's like, okay, I think this is ridiculous. This is not it. And Prajapati says, okay, yeah, 32 more years. So Indra stays for 32 more years. And then he says, that being Prajapati says, in that being when you're dreaming, who's enjoying the dreams, who's masterful, who, is being worshipped by everyone, that is the self. And Indra's like, oh, right. Wait a minute. Sometimes when I have a dream, it kind of sucks. I suffer. Does the self suffer like that in the dream? And Prajapati says, good, well done. So you can see there's this iterative process. He's giving it, and the demon, the Asura, he took what he could get. He was like, mine, and he ran off. And he was satisfied with that for the time. Indra was not satisfied. And so, 32 more years. And Prajapati says, okay, so the self, when you're completely asleep and you're totally at rest and your organs are just completely silent and everything is still, that is the self. And Indra's like, yeah, okay, I get it. But I'm unconscious then. Is the self unconscious? And Prajapati's like, aha, well done. 5 more years. So This is a total of 101 years. I'm not sure the significance of that, but all the 32s and the 5 are 101. And Indra, finally, Prajapati says to Indra, all of these things, what you can see when you're awake, what you see in a dream, that dream world, the absolute depth of sleep, all of this is the self. And beyond that, the self is the depth of your own being that doesn't die when the body dies, and that doesn't suffer when the body suffers, and is not confused when the mind is confused. That radiant, eternal radiance of your being. Earlier in the Chandogya, it says that the self is like a dam that separates Brahman, the world of infinite radiance, and this world. And in that sense, the self is, you think of a dam, on the one side is water and on the other side is not water, right? But the self is being touched by both. So the self is here experiencing this world, and the self is also experiencing the world of limitless light, the world of limitless radiance that is Brahman. And so this is the kind of teaching that the Upanishads provides. The Mandukya Upanishad takes this idea of waking life, dreaming sleep, and deep dreamless sleep, and equates it to the 3 letters of the word Om. And it says that the letter A in Om is waking life, and the letter U in Om is the dreaming world, and the letter M in Om is dreamless sleep. And this is revisited in the Prajna Upanishad as well. The teacher's saying to the students, when you're all of these, you can meditate on the and you can achieve realization of everything that you can see. You can really understand everything that you can see. You can meditate on the Ao, and you can achieve profound understanding of everything you can see and the world of dreams. And, dreams isn't just like dreams when you're asleep. Dreams is daydreaming. Dreams is imagination. Dreams is, other dimensions of reality that intersect with this dimension, art and music. And so, or you can meditate on all 3 Om, and you can realize fully the reality that exists when you're in a state of dreamless sleep. But when you chant them all together, something else happens. And this in the Mandukya Upanishad is called the Turiya state, the 4th state, beyond, the silence at the end of the Om, or the chanting of the Om altogether. It's depicted differently in different texts. All of this is what Prajapati's teaching was to Indra. All of this is the self. It's not just what you can see. It's not just what's in dreaming. It's not just when you're asleep. It's everything. And some of the more cosmological texts, parts of the Upanishads, talk about like Brahman or Purusha, the person, the absolute person, is like a fire. And all of creation is like sparks emerging from the fire. Or it's like a spider, and all of creation emerges from the spider like a web. It's like that one being, and there's kind of infinite lists of things that emerge or are manifested by the Purusha or by Brahman. Everything in the universe, everything. So this is where it gets to like, it's very practical. It's very immediate. It's very relevant. Everything in the universe is one. And that one is you. That one is your deepest, most real self. And there's a part of the Chandogya Upanishad that talks about how to realize that self. Well, there's part of several of them, but in this particular part, it talks about brahmacharya, which is a word that we hear in the yoga tradition. Brahmacharya, continence is generally, sexual continence. Interestingly, in the Prajna Upanishad, it just says, don't have sex during the day. Brahmacharya is only having sex at night. So that's different. But in the Chandogya, it's really interesting. It says brahmacharya is And it kind of lists all these different things. And it's basically like, not yelling at somebody when you're mad. I mean, that's not exactly the example, but it's these examples that are just about like containment, basically. Containment. And so we have all these impulses and we are engaged in this external reality and in all these stories all the time. To discover ourself, we sit still and we look for it. That's the other thing that it says. It's not achieved by thinking about it. It's not achieved by the mind or through the senses. It's achieved by seeking it. And to the seeker, to the one who's sincere, and just like all these frameworks of the teacher-student situation, the Upanishad says, the Brahman reveals its body to, Brahman reveals its body to the seeker. It's not like we achieve something. It's not like we gain something. We offer our humble, reverential sincerity, and the Divine One decides to reveal itself to us. That's the dynamic. That's the framework. This world, and especially the world of yoga in the West, has become very entangled with capitalism and extraction. And the ego has appropriated the idea of yoga to its own glamorization and gratification and aggrandizement. What we see around us as yoga in the West is not generally the same yoga that the Upanishads are talking about. What we see is, I'm going to get better, I'm going to get stronger, I'm going to get more flexible, I'm going to get more whatever. I, better, more me. The Upanishads are saying all of that is an illusion. All of that is like the blind leading the blind. The depth of yourself is not to be found in all that swirl. The depth of yourself is to be found inside you. In the Katha Upanishad, Death says to Nachiketas, the Purusha, the self-born one, Svayambhu, the self-born one, pierced the sense organs outward. So we're always drawn out by what we see, what we hear, what we feel. We're pulled outside. So it's kind of an acknowledgement. It's set up like that. Very rare is it that there's one who turns back inside and looks within themselves. The Katha Upanishad makes a clear distinction between fleeting pleasures and what is good, what is true. Because Nachiketas, death tempts Nachiketas with all these amazing things. And Nachiketas is like, I don't want any of that. I want what's eternal. I want what's true. And so death is like, wow, that's so amazing. It's so rare that somebody turns away the fleeting pleasures of the world, power, money, fame, glory, and instead seeks the truth of the self, the immortal. And that, these are some of the words that are generally used for Brahman or Purusha: immortal, unharmable, infinite radiance, purity. The mantra that I sang at the beginning, Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya, is called the Pavamana prayer, the prayer of purification. It comes at the beginning of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the prayer of purification. May I be led from darkness, from untruth to truth. Truth is not the best translation of Sat. Sat is like reality, like what is, so from what is not, from unreality, from untruth to reality, truth. Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya. This mantra encapsulates the Upanishads. The Upanishads say, the radiance, the pure absolute radiance of who you are, infinite, unharmable, permanent, is clouded over, is obstructed. We're all wrapped up in confusion and in things that are not that. And by releasing those things, by examining ourselves, by letting things settle and aligning ourselves, seeking the truth of our being, one who knows Brahman becomes Brahman. One who realizes Brahman becomes Brahman. So by touching, by seeing, by realizing the depth of ourselves, that's how we become that. That's how we become immortal. That's how we become infinite radiance. That's how all of our desires are fulfilled in that oneness. And that's the seeking of it is the process of purification. It's the process of releasing all of the obscurities that have gotten themselves wrapped around us. And I know that purification is kind of a confusing word in our modern world. People get confused about thinking that it means self-hatred for some reason. And of course, every spiritual concept can be twisted by the ego. I mean, that's what happens. But self-hatred is an obscurity. Self-hatred is an impurity. So purification doesn't mean self-hatred. Purification means releasing self-hatred. It also means releasing self-aggrandizement. It means releasing everything that's not true. Every illusion that we have about ourselves that's generated by and rooted in fear or, loneliness or, a misinterpretation or misunderstanding of who we are and what reality is. So I'm going to stop for a moment. I know I've said a lot of things. I do have I've been inspired by the past few weeks to do a course on the Upanishads because there's just so much. I mean, I just rattled off a lot of things, but each one of those things is like a little tip of the iceberg, and there's just so much depth under each one. So within this narrow time frame, there's only so far we can go with kind of the breadth of amazing content that is the Upanishads.